History rarely collapses in a single moment. Empires do not always fall in flames. Sometimes they thin, they stretch, they hollow from within. By the mid-11th century, the Abbasid Caliph still ruled from Baghdad, at least in name. The mosques still mentioned his authority in Friday sermons. Coins still carried his legitimacy. Scholars still debated law under the umbrella of his title. But power had drifted. Provincial dynasties governed independently. Military commanders held influence. Persian bureaucrats shaped administration. The caliph remained, but the machinery around him had loosened. The Islamic world was not collapsing. It was decentralizing. And in moments like this, history does not ask for a theologian. It asks for a stabilizer. From the distant steppes of Central Asia, mounted warriors were already moving westward. They were not scholars of Baghdad. They were not heirs of Abbasid culture. They were the Seljuqs, and they would not destroy the caliphate. They would redefine it. The Seljuqs were born in a world utterly different from Baghdad. They were Turkic nomads of the Oghuz Confederation, raised in mobility, hardened by steppe warfare, disciplined by tribal hierarchy. Their early life revolved around pasture, migration, mounted, archery, and clan loyalty. But they did something decisive. They embraced Islam. Conversion did not instantly turn them into administrators or urban governors. But it did something more important. It gave them entry into the political world of the Islamic civilization they were approaching. As they moved into Khorasan and Persia in the early 11th century, they did not encounter emptiness. They encountered Persian bureaucratic sophistication, Islamic legal traditions, and Abbasid symbolic authority. Instead of rejecting this world, they adopted it. They did not erase Persian administration, they relied on it. They did not abolish Abbasid legitimacy, they sought it. They did not replace Islamic law, they protected it. This combination would define their rule. In 1055, Tughril Beg entered Baghdad. This was not a Mongol sack. It was not a revolutionary overthrow. It was a transfer of power, executed carefully. The Buyids, a Shia Persian dynasty, had dominated Baghdad and reduced the Abbasid Caliph to political weakness. The Seljuqs, aligned with Sunni orthodoxy, presented themselves as restorers. The Caliph recognized Tughril as Sultan. This moment changed Islamic political structure permanently. For the first time, executive authority, military and administrative, was formally separated from spiritual legitimacy. The Caliph became the guardian of religious continuity. The Sultan became the wielder of power. This dual structure would influence Islamic governance for centuries. The Seljuqs did not abolish the caliphate. They institutionalized hierarchy within it. The Sultan governed territories, commanded armies, and directed fiscal management. The Caliph granted recognition and preserved continuity of Islamic authority. This division was not accidental. It solved a crisis. The Abbasid structure had grown too large and too militarily vulnerable to operate as it once did. The Seljuqs provided the muscle while allowing the caliphate to remain symbolically intact. In effect, the Islamic political world became layered. Legitimacy above, executive authority below, bureaucracy in between. This model would echo later in the Mamluks and Ottomans. Under Sultan Malik Shah, r. 1072 to 1092, the Seljuk state reached its peak. But the true architect of its institutional strength was his vizier, Nizam al-Mulk. Nizam al-Mulk was not a warrior. He was an administrator, strategist, and political thinker. His treatise, Siyasatnama, was more than advice. It was a blueprint for governance. Under his supervision, administrative districts were standardized. Tax systems were organized. Military funding was structured. Bureaucracy was disciplined. He understood something profound. Empires collapse not from invasion first, but from administrative decay. One of the Seljuks' most important contributions was the refinement of the Iqta system. Rather than paying soldiers directly from a centralized treasury, which risked bankruptcy, Land revenues were assigned to military officers in exchange for service. But this was not private ownership. The land remained technically state property. Iqta holders collected taxes, maintained troops, and fulfilled military duties, but they did not legally own the territory. This distinction separated the Seljuk system from European feudalism. In Europe, land often became hereditary and autonomous. In the Seljuk model, authority remained theoretically centralized. This balance strengthened short-term stability. But as we will see in later episodes, decentralization always carries risk. Political order is not merely about palaces. It is about roads. The Seljuks understood that economic vitality required security. They suppressed banditry. They protected caravan routes. They secured trade corridors linking Central Asia, Persia, Iraq, Anatolia. Merchants could travel with greater confidence. Caravanserais were constructed along major routes. Infrastructure was supported. Markets flourish where violence recedes. The Seljuks did not invent Abbasid economic institutions. They stabilized the environment in which they operated. Perhaps one of the most underestimated Seljuk achievements was educational institutionalization. Nizam al-Mulk established the Nizamiyya madrasas across major cities, including Baghdad. These were not casual learning circles. They were state-backed institutions designed to train jurists, standardize Sunni legal thought, produce administrators, reinforce orthodoxy. Education became a tool of political cohesion. Legal consistency strengthened courts. Courts strengthened markets. Markets strengthened state revenue. Everything connected. In 1071, the Seljuks defeated the Byzantine Empire at the Battle of Manzikert. This victory reshaped the map of Anatolia. Turkic migration into Anatolia accelerated. This would lay foundations for future powers, including the Ottomans centuries later. But the Seljuks were not merely conquerors. They incorporated new territories gradually, integrating them into existing administrative frameworks. Theirs was not purely destructive expansion. It was absorptive. After Malik Shah's death in 1092, unity fractured. The Seljuk Empire split into regional branches. Great Seljuks in Persia, Seljuks of Rum in Anatolia, Syrian Seljuks. Decentralization intensified. The same military delegation that created stability began to loosen cohesion. This is the paradox of power sharing. It strengthens resilience, but it weakens central uniformity. While the Seljuks were stabilizing the Eastern Islamic world, a new pressure emerged. The First Crusade. The fragmentation of Seljuk authority complicated response. Though Turkish forces fought fiercely, lack of centralized unity allowed Crusader states to establish footholds in the Levant. This was not a failure of military capability. It was a failure of coordination. History rarely punishes weakness alone. It punishes division. Even as political fragmentation increased, institutional life continued. Markets operated. Courts functioned. Madrasas taught. Trade networks remained active. This continuity is critical. The Seljuks did not create a new civilization. They preserved an existing one during political turbulence. Without them, Abbasid institutions might have collapsed decades earlier. The Seljuk model shaped Islamic governance for centuries. Sultanate authority, Iqta land assignment, state-supported education, bureaucratic Persianization, Sunni consolidation. Later dynasties, including the Mamluks and Ottomans, inherited this structural template. The Seljuks were transitional, but essential. They bridged the gap between classical Abbasid centralism and later imperial formations. The Seljuks did not build Baghdad. They did not found the Abbasid Caliphate. They did not write the earliest chapters of Islamic civilization. But when that civilization began to weaken, they stood between order and collapse. They arrived as warriors from the steppe. They became guardians of a civilization built in cities. They understood something essential. Power is not only meant to conquer. At times, Power must protect. The Seljuqs held the sword, but they preserved the scholar. They commanded armies, but they upheld the Caliph. They ruled territories, but they stabilized institutions. Because of them, courts continued to function. Markets remained secure. Madrasas flourished. Trade routes stayed open. History often celebrates founders, but survival requires defenders. Without the Seljuqs, the Abbasid world might have fractured beyond repair in the 11th century. Instead, it adapted. This was not the fall of a civilization. It was its transformation. And transformation is sometimes the greatest act of strength. If you value history that goes beyond dates, history that explains how systems survive, adapt, and evolve, then support this journey. Like this episode, subscribe to History Showcase, and stay with us as we continue exploring the forces that shaped our world. Because history does not disappear. It changes form, and it waits to be understood.